It was my first semester of college. I was going out of state for school. It was a big change for me, considering I always lived in the same hometown. I was excited though. At the school I go to, freshmen are required to live on campus for at least the first semester. This meant I'd be living with a roommate that I didn't know. I knew this coming in, and didn't really think it would be a problem. I had visited the school earlier in the summer for orientation, and even met a couple friends, which was good. I at least would know a couple of people there. I showed up at school in August for my first semester, excited, but admittedly a little nervous as well. I went to check in and was given the keys to my room. I got upstairs, and my roommate was already in there. I said, "What's up?" and asked what his name was. He said his name was Ben, and I told him I was Nick. I tried to make a little more small talk, asking where he was from and what his major was, and just stuff like that. He seemed like a man of short words, though, because he was only giving one-word answers, and wasn't contributing much to the conversation. I didn't really think too much about it. I was supposed to meet some friends I met at orientation for dinner that night, and then we were going to this freshman sort of meet and greet thing the school was putting on. I walked downstairs and met with my friends. We sat in the middle of the cafeteria. About 15 minutes after we sat down, I noticed that Ben was sitting by himself in the very back corner. I knew it was him because I recognized the hoodie he was wearing. He had the hood up and appeared to be watching what I assumed to be a video on his phone. I almost went over there and asked if he wanted to come sit with us, but it looked to me like he didn't want to be bothered, so I just stayed put. We went over to the area where the meet and greet thing was going on. It went well, and I ended up meeting a lot of other cool people. At one point, I noticed that Ben was there, in one of the corners by himself. This time, he was just watching everyone else. I was kinda disappointed that my roommate didn't seem to be as social as maybe I would have liked, but at least I had made some new friends. I glanced over to the spot he had been before again, and he was gone this time. Fast forward an hour or so, and I was ready to head back to my room for the night. It had been a long day of moving and unpacking, and I was pretty tired. I got back. Ben was here as well. It seemed like he was already asleep though. It was only like 9 p.m. I guess he was just as tired as I was. I took a shower and hopped into bed. I was watching YouTube and checking through some school emails when I realized that it said some of my emails had been opened. I remember mouthing, "What the hell?" There was no way I opened those emails. I hadn't even checked my email for like 3 days because I was so busy getting ready to move. I was looking through some of my other documents and stuff I had on there to see if any of that looked any different. As far as I could tell, everything seemed to be as it should. I went back to watching YouTube, not really sure if I was just losing it from being so tired, or if I actually had opened those emails within the past couple of days and just forgot. A disturbing thought entered my mind. What if Ben had gone through my computer at some point when I was out earlier? I had no password on it, so he easily could have grabbed it out of my backpack and opened it. I looked at my bag on the floor. Didn't I leave that on my desk chair before I left for dinner? I was paranoid about it now. I was actually starting to believe that this kid went through all of my stuff, including my computer. I took a side glance to my left to look at him in his bed. He was laying on his side facing me, eyes wide open staring at me. He shut his eyes real fast once he noticed I saw him. I knew for a fact he was staring at me because my computer screen was on and it cast enough light to be able to see him. After that, I just turned my computer off and tried to go to sleep. I woke up the next morning and Ben was gone. I went through the rest of my bag to see if I could notice if anything was messed with. I couldn't say for sure if it had been or not. I had a lot to do that day again, so I was kind of in a hurry. Fast forward to that night at about 7. I got back to the room and Ben was there again, except this time he was awake. It was weird. Neither of us said a word to each other. I felt like I had to ask him about the computer, just for my own clarity, so I did. I walked over and asked, "Did you go through my computer last night?" He responded with a quick and firm no. I asked again if he was sure, and he said yes. I didn't like his answer though. I got a strong sense from his tone that he was lying. I just tried to move on from it at this point. That night, I was laying down trying to fall asleep. I glanced over to the side of the room, and he was sitting up on his bed against the wall, staring over towards me. I'm not gonna lie, it looked like he was possessed or something. I don't think he noticed that I saw him this time, because he didn't move. That was enough for me though. The next morning, I requested a new roommate. I told him I had reason to believe he went through my stuff and caught him staring at me 2 nights in a row. My request was actually granted surprisingly. I ended up finding out that this kid's real name wasn't even Ben. It was Thomas or something like that, I don't remember exactly. That just raised even more red flags, that he didn't even tell me his real name. I haven't seen him since, and I don't really know what happened to him. I got a new roommate and everything was good. I've since moved off campus and gotten a house with a bunch of close friends. I bought a house a couple years ago with my girlfriend. Well, recently that hasn't gone well, and we ended up breaking up a couple months back. She was helping with the house payment and bills, so when she left, it was now all on me. It was becoming a lot, and I came up with the idea of renting out one of my rooms in the house. It wasn't ideal, but I needed the cash, and the room wasn't being used for anything anyways. I posted an ad on Facebook saying I was looking for a roommate. I ended up getting a response pretty quickly from some guy named Jeff. He told me he was interested, and wanted to come by and check the place out. He came by one afternoon after work, and I showed him around. He was in his 40s and seemed normal enough first impressions. I gave him the rundown of what my expectations were, and kinda how I planned for things to go. He said it sounded good to him, and it was a deal. I told him to let me know when he might want to officially move in, just so that I was aware. I was having second thoughts multiple times about the whole thing. It just kinda made me uncomfortable having a stranger living in my house, even though he seemed like a normal guy. I wasn't really thinking, considering I needed the cash because of the situation with my ex-girlfriend. Jeff ended up moving in a couple days later, and everything was fine for those first couple days. I was walking down the hall to my bedroom at the end of the hall, and past Jeff's door. It was open, and I just peeked in a second while walking past. The floor was literally covered in clothes and shoes already. It hadn't even been 2 days yet, and his room was already a disaster. I figured it really wasn't my business as long as the rest of the house stayed clean, so I just ignored it. A couple nights later, I ended up waking up around 3 a.m. Sometimes I have trouble sleeping, so this wasn't uncommon. I could hear creaks on the floor from down the hall and what sounded like multiple voices. It was hard to tell since it sounded like a low whisper, but this was concerning. I got out of bed and walked into the hall. No one was there. I walked further into the kitchen and the living room. No one. I went back down the hall and past Jeff's door. The creaking noises and voices had stopped. I couldn't be sure I heard voices, but I know for a fact I heard the creaking sound from the floor, so he definitely had just been walking around, whether it was in his room or out in the house somewhere. I went back to bed and shut the door. I lay awake a while, having trouble falling back asleep. I heard this weird pushing sounding noise. It was definitely coming from Jeff's room, or at least in that direction of the house. I had no clue what it could have been though. I eventually fell asleep, however. The next day I got up, and Jeff had already left for work. I knew his work schedule because he had told me before he moved in. His door was cracked slightly open. I stepped inside, and the first thing I noticed was that the floor was completely bare of any clothes. So, at least he cleaned up in there a little bit. I'm not proud of it, but I did a little snooping around in there. What really caught my attention was in his closet there was lingerie-style clothing sitting on a little table that was placed in there. It was already unusual, but I took a look at it more closely. It appeared that it belonged to a younger girl, and by younger, I mean possibly anywhere from 14 to 16 years old. Obviously, this was a huge concern. I felt sick to my stomach thinking about what could have potentially been going on in my house. I went over to the window and looked out to try and calm down a little bit. I went to open it to get some fresh air real quick. The sound of the window pushing up was familiar. It was in fact the same sound I heard the night prior when I heard something that I wasn't so sure what it was. So there was at least one other person in my house sneaking out his window. This just made me even more suspicious about what was actually going on. I decided against confronting him about it when he got home. I still didn't know him too well and didn't want to cause a situation I wasn't prepared for. This was only a couple weeks ago, and I still hear the floor creaking from pressure late at night occasionally. I thought about contacting the police about it. I'm not sure I have enough evidence yet to get him charged with anything. I did order a couple cameras, and I'm going to put one of them outside in a bush that faces the window in his room. If the camera sees something, I will involve the proper authorities if need be. Until then, I will wait to see what happens and keep you updated. This story was actually told to me by a friend. She used to live in an apartment with 3 other roommates. They all had separate rooms to themselves. One of her roommates had a sleepwalking issue. It was almost a nightly occurrence. She even sometimes would sleepwalk into other people's rooms unknowingly. Even if they had locked the doors, she would wander around the entire apartment sleepwalking for hours. She tried to get on medication for it, but apparently nothing was working. The worst part, however, was the nightmares. Although less frequent, they were problematic to say the least. She would wake up randomly, screaming loudly in this high-pitched voice. It was so loud that they were asked on numerous occasions by neighbors what was going on. My friend said it was scary, and they tried to all help as best they could, but there wasn't much they could do. She was otherwise fine during the daytime, but when it came to sleep, it was a literal nightmare. These night terror episodes were common, and lasted all the way until my friend moved out and on her own a few months later. I remember when my friend was telling me this story. She mentioned how at times it really felt like she was possessed by the way the screams sounded and the way she would sleepwalk. She said that being in the same apartment as someone when that's going on is extremely scary. Like I said, she moved out on her own not too much later. I think the girl is receiving different medication for this now. I just hope she gets the help that she needs.